The sound of breaking glass shattered the evening quiet behind Golden Dragon Restaurant, followed by a child's terrified cry that made Maya's blood freeze. She dropped the bag of trash she'd been carrying to the dumpster and moved toward the narrow alley, her heart hammering against her ribs. The autumn air in Seattle carried the scent of rain and something darker, something that made her skin crawl with primitive warning. Where are you watching from tonight as this story unfolds? Comment below and let me know what city or state you're in, because sometimes the most dangerous moments find us in the most ordinary places, just like they're about to find Maya. 3 men surrounded a small boy who couldn't be more than 8 years old. The child was pressed against the brick wall, his school uniform torn and bloodied, his face pale with terror. The attackers wore dark clothing and moved with predatory confidence, their voices harsh and unfamiliar as they spoke in rapid Korean. Maya didn't understand the words, but she understood violence. "Get away from him," she called out, her voice stronger than she felt. The men turned toward her with startled expressions that quickly shifted to calculating assessment. Maya stood 5 feet 6 inches in her work clothes, her dark skin glistening with perspiration from the kitchen heat, her natural hair pulled back in a practical bun. She looked like what she was, a restaurant manager heading home after a long shift. She looked like no threat at all. The largest man stepped toward her, his smile cold and predatory. He said something in Korean that sounded like a dismissal, a command for her to leave. Instead, Maya reached for her phone, her thumb hovering over the emergency call button. The universal language of police intervention needed no translation. The men exchanged glances. The leader barked an order, and they melted away into the shadows between buildings like smoke, leaving behind only the echo of running footsteps and the child's ragged breathing. Maya knelt beside the boy, her hands gentle as she assessed his injuries. A split lip, bruised cheek, scraped knees where he'd fallen. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to make her chest tighten with protective fury. His eyes were wide and dark, filled with intelligence and fear in equal measure. "Are you hurt badly?" she asked softly. "Can you tell me your name?" The child looked up at her with those impossibly mature eyes and spoke in careful, accented English. "Gene. My name is Gene. Thank you for helping me." Maya helped him to his feet, noting how he favored his left ankle but tried to hide the limp. Brave little one, she thought. She guided him toward the restaurant's back in trance, her mind already planning how to clean his wounds and get him somewhere safe. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's get you cleaned up and figure out how to get you home." What Maya didn't know was that 2 blocks away, a black sedan sat in the shadows with its engine running. The man in the passenger seat spoke quietly into a secure phone, his voice respectful but urgent as he delivered his report in flawless Korean. "The boy has been found, sir." A civilian interfered with the extraction attempt. African-American female, approximately 25 years old, appears to work at the restaurant. She's taken him inside. The voice on the other end of the call was low, controlled, and absolutely lethal in its calm precision. "Describe her." "Tall, attractive, moves with confidence." She scared off 3 armed men to protect the boy. "No hositación." A long pause filled only with the sound of rain beginning to fall against the sedan's windshield. "Keep watching. Do not engage. I'm coming personally." The line went dead, and in a penthouse across the city, Kwang Min-jun set down his phone with movements as controlled and precise as a blade finding its sheath. His son was safe. The woman who had saved Jean had unknowingly stepped into a world where acts of kindness came with deadly consequences. Inside the restaurant, Maya carefully cleaned Jin's wounds with warm water and antiseptic from the first aid kit. The boy sat quietly on a chair in her small office, watching her with those ancient eyes that seemed to see too much for someone so young. "Those men," she said gently as she applied a bandage to his scraped knee. "Do you know why they wanted to hurt you?" Jin's expression shuddered, and Maya recognized the look of a child who had learned too early that some truths were dangerous to speak aloud. "I cannot say," he whispered, "but they will come back. They always come back." Maya's hands stilled in their work. The absolute certainty in his voice chilled her more than the October wind rattling the windows. "Then we need to get you home to your parents," she said firmly. Where do you live? What's your phone number? Jin's small hand caught hers, his grip surprisingly strong for someone so young. His eyes held hers with desperate intensity. Please, he said quietly. Can I stay here just a little longer? Just until my father comes. Maya looked down at this brave, frightened little boy and felt her heart make a decision her mind would later question. Of course, sweetheart. We'll wait together. Neither of them noticed the shadow that passed by the restaurant's windows, or the way the temperature in the room seemed to drop as if winter itself had stepped through the walls. Kwang Min-jun had arrived in Seattle's Chinatown, and the ordinary evening that had started with taking out trash was about to become something that would change Maya's life forever. The rescue was complete, but the real danger was just beginning. Maya's small apartment above the restaurant had never felt more like a sanctuary than it did with Jean curled up on her couch, finally sleeping peacefully after she'd fed him leftover bulgogi and listened to his careful, edited version of his evening. She'd given him one of her oversized sweaters to wear while his uniform dried, and he looked impossibly young wrapped in the soft gray fabric that fell nearly to his knees. The knock at her door came at exactly midnight. 3 precise raps that somehow managed to sound both polite and absolutely commanding. Maya froze in her kitchen, a cup of chamomile tea halfway to her lips. Jin's eyes opened immediately, and she saw knowledge there, resignation mixed with relief. He found me, Jean whispered, and there was something in his voice that made Maya's blood turn to ice water. The knock came again, patient but implacable. Maya moved to the door, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floor, and looked through the peephole. What she saw made her step back, so quickly she nearly stumbled. A man stood in her narrow hallway, and even through the distorted fisheye lens, his presence was overwhelming. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black suit that looked like it cost more than Maya made in 6 months. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his face carved from marble and shadow. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch in her throat. Cold, intelligent, and absolutely lethal. Behind him, she could see the shapes of other men, silent sentinels blocking any possible escape route. Maya turned to look at Jean, who had sat up on the couch, his small hands folded in his lap with practiced composure. Who is he? She whispered. My father, Jean said simply. The revelation hit Maya like a physical blow. The boy she'd rescued from 3 attackers in an alley was the son of someone who commanded this level of security, this level of fear. Someone who could find them within hours and arrive with what looked like a small army. Maya opened the door. Kwang Min-jun filled the doorway like a force of nature barely contained in human form. Up close, his presence was even more devastating. He stood 6 feet 4 inches of control power, his suit tailored to perfection over a frame that suggested violence held in careful check. His face was beautiful in the way that predators were beautiful, all sharp angles and dangerous symmetry. The scent of his cologne reached her first, something expensive and distinctly masculine that made her aware of how small her apartment suddenly felt. His dark eyes swept over her with clinical assessment, cataloging everything from her faded NYU t-shirt to her natural hair falling loose around her shoulders. When his gaze met hers, Maya felt like prey being evaluated by something infinitely more dangerous than she could comprehend. Miss Johnson, he said, and his voice was exactly what she'd expected. Low, controlled, with the faintest trace of an accent that made her name sound like poetry spoken in a foreign language. I am Kwang Min-jun. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Maya stepped aside, her survival instincts finally overriding her confusion. Jean rose from the couch and moved to his father's side with quiet dignity, accepting the gentle hand that Kwang placed on his shoulder. The transformation in the man was immediate and subtle, the killing frost in his expression warming to something that might have been tenderness if it weren't wrapped in such absolute authority. Are you injured? Kwang asked his son in Korean, his voice softer but no less commanding. Jean answered in the same language, gesturing to his bandaged knee and split lip. Kwang's eyes returned to Maya, and she saw something flicker in their depths that might have been gratitude. You helped him, Kwang said. It was not a question. Those men were hurting him, Maya replied, finding her voice at last. I couldn't just walk away. No, Kwong said quietly, studying her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. I did not believe you could. He stepped fully into her apartment, and Maya became acutely aware that she had just invited an apex predator into her small, safe world. His security detail remained in the hallway, but their presence was tangible even through the closed door. The men who attacked Jean, Kwong continued, his voice taking on the clinical precision of someone delivering a briefing, are members of a rival organization. They wanted to use him to leverage a business negotiation in their favor. Maya felt the blood drain from her face as understanding crashed over her like cold water. Business negotiation. Leverage. The careful euphemisms painted a picture that made her stomach twist with fear. She started, then stopped because even in her shocked state, she recognized that some truths were too dangerous to speak aloud in front of a child. I'm a businessman, Kwong said with the ghost of a smile that held no warmth whatsoever. I handle various import and export operations throughout the Pacific Northwest. Some of my competitors occasionally resort to unconventional negotiation tactics. Maya stared at him, recognizing the careful language for what it was. Import and export. Business negotiations. Competitors. Her rescue of Jean hadn't been a simple good deed. It had been an act of war in a conflict she didn't understand. You interfered with their operation, Kwong continued, his voice never changing from that terrifyingly calm tone. By saving Jean, you have made yourself a person of interest to them. They will want to know what you saw, what you know, and how you might be used against me. The words hit Maya like physical blows, each one driving home the magnitude of what her moment of compassion had cost her. I don't know anything, she said quickly. I just saw them hurting a child. I don't know who you are or what business you're talking about. Unfortunately, Kwong replied, stepping closer until she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. That will not matter to them. The fact that you helped Jean makes you a potential asset to be acquired or a threat to be eliminated. Maya sank into the chair by her small dining table, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. This isn't happening, she thought desperately. This can't be real. What do you want from me? She whispered. Kwong crouched down until he was at her eye level, bringing his face close enough that she could see the slight scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the only flaw in his perfect features. I want to keep you alive, he said simply, which means you will come with us tonight. You will stay under my protection until this matter is resolved. Maya's head snapped up, her fear crystallizing into anger. You can't just take me. I have a job, responsibilities. I don't even know you. Kwong stood slowly, his expression never changing from that mask of controlled authority. Miss Johnson, he said, and there was something in his voice that made every nerve ending in her body stand at attention. You have two choices. You can come with me willingly as my guest and be kept safe while I handle the situation. Or you can attempt to continue your normal life and be dead within 48 hours. The casual certainty in his voice was more terrifying than any threat could have been. That's not a choice, Maya said, hating how small her voice sounded. That's coercion. Yes, Kwong agreed without a trace of apology. It is. Jean moved to Maya's side, his small hand finding hers with surprising warmth. He will protect you, Jean said quietly in his careful English. My father always keeps his promises. Maya looked down at the boy, then up at the man who commanded such fear and loyalty in equal measure. Kwong Minjun stood like a marble statue in her tiny apartment, beautiful and cold and absolutely immovable. She could see in his eyes that he meant every word he'd spoken. This was not a negotiation. This was not a request. This was a claiming. How long? She asked finally. Until it's safe, Kwong replied. Until they understand that touching what is mine carries a price they are not willing to pay. The way he said mine made something deep in Maya's chest flutter with an emotion she didn't want to examine too closely. 1 hour, he continued, checking the expensive watch on his wrist. Pack what you need. My men will escort you. Maya stood on unsteady legs, looking around her small apartment that suddenly felt like a prison she was about to leave behind. Everything familiar, everything safe, was about to disappear because she'd made the choice to help a frightened child. And as she watched Kwang Min-jun standing in her living room like a dark angel of protection and destruction, Maya realized that her ordinary life had just ended. The question now was what would rise from its ashes. Kwang's compound existed in a world Maya had only seen in movies about people whose wealth moved mountains and toppled governments. The main house rose from manicured gardens like something carved from marble and moonlight, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that managed to feel both open and impenetrable. The morning light streaming through those windows revealed rooms furnished with museum-quality pieces, each surface gleaming with the kind of perfection that required an army of invisible hands to maintain. Maya stood in the guest suite she'd been assigned, watching the sunrise paint the Puget Sound in shades of rose gold beyond the bulletproof glass. The room was larger than her entire apartment had been, decorated in soft grays and cream whites that should have felt peaceful. Instead, the luxury felt like a beautiful cage, every comfort provided except the one thing she wanted most: freedom. The sound of small footsteps in the hallway made her turn toward the door. Gene appeared in the doorway, already dressed in a fresh school uniform, his dark hair still damp from his shower. The bruises on his face had darkened overnight, purple and yellow shadows that made Maya's chest tighten with protective fury all over again. "Good morning, Miss Maya," Gene said formally, bowing slightly in a gesture that seemed both natural and heartbreaking on someone so young. "Just Maya, sweetheart," she corrected gently, moving to kneel at his eye level. "How did you sleep?" Jin's careful composure cracked just slightly. "I had bad dreams," he admitted quietly, "about the men in the alley." Maya felt something fierce and maternal surge through her chest. Without thinking, she reached out and pulled him into a gentle hug, feeling how he melted against her with the desperate relief of a child who had been trying too hard to be brave. "Dreams can't hurt you," she whispered against his dark hair. "And those men can't reach you here." Jean pulled back to look at her with those impossibly mature eyes. "Father says you will stay with us until it is safe. Are you afraid?" Maya considered lying, giving him the comfortable adult reassurance that everything would be fine. Instead, she chose honesty. "A little," she said, "but not of your father. Not of being here with you." Jean smiled then, the first genuine expression of happiness she'd seen from him, and Maya felt something settle into place in her chest. Whatever else happened in this strange, dangerous world, this child needed her. "Will you make breakfast?" Jean asked hopefully. "Father's cook is very good, but she makes Korean food. I miss American pancakes." Maya laughed, surprising herself with the sound. "Lead the way to the kitchen, little man." The kitchen was a chef's dream, all granite and stainless steel with appliances that probably cost more than most people's cars. Maya moved through the space with growing confidence, gathering ingredients while Gene perched on a bar stool and chattered about school, his favorite subjects, the soccer team he wanted to join. Normal 80-year-old concerns that felt surreal in this palace of controlled danger. She was flipping the third batch of pancakes when she felt the weight of someone's attention like a physical touch against her shoulder blades. Maya turned to find Kwang standing in the kitchen doorway, perfectly dressed in another suit that emphasized the dangerous elegance of his frame. His dark eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her suddenly aware of how she must look in yesterday's clothes, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, flour dusting her hands. "Good morning," she said, proud of how steady her voice sounded despite the way her pulse had accelerated the moment he appeared. Kwang nodded once, his gaze shifting to Jean, who was explaining the proper syrup-to-pancake ratio with the seriousness of a scholar discussing ancient philosophy. "You do not need to cook for him," Kwang said, but there was something in his tone that suggested he wasn't entirely displeased with the scene before him. "I wanted to," Maya replied simply. "He asked for pancakes." Something flickered across Kwang's expression, too quick for her to interpret. He moved into the kitchen with that predatory grace she was beginning to recognize, pouring himself coffee from the machine with practiced efficiency. "Father," Jean said brightly, switching to Korean for a rapid explanation that made Kwang's eyebrows rise slightly. English, Jean, Kwang corrected gently but firmly, is polite when we have a guest. Jean flushed slightly but obediently repeated his statement in careful English. I told him that you make the best pancakes in Seattle, and that you saved my life, and that you are very pretty. Maya felt heat flood her cheeks, while Kwang's expression became unreadable behind that mask of controlled authority. All accurate observations, Kwang said finally, and Maya wasn't sure if he was talking to Jean or to her. The breakfast conversation revealed layers to both father and son that Maya hadn't expected. Kwang's attention to Jean was absolute, asking detailed questions about his schoolwork, his friends, his dreams for the future. But underneath the loving father, Maya could sense the businessman conducting a debriefing, cataloging every detail of his son's life for potential threats or weaknesses. After breakfast, Kwang disappeared into what Jean called the business wing of the house, leaving Maya to explore her gilded prison. The compound was a masterpiece of defensive architecture disguised as luxury living. Every room had multiple exits, every window was reinforced, and Maya began to notice the security cameras tucked discreetly into architectural details like expensive jewelry hidden in plain sight. She found Jean in a library that would have made university scholars weep with envy, surrounded by books in Korean, English, and what looked like Japanese. He was struggling with homework that appeared to be several grade levels beyond what most 80-year-olds would attempt. "This looks challenging," Maya said, settling beside him on the leather couch. "Father says I must be smarter than other children," Jean explained matter-of-factly, "because our life is more dangerous." The casual acceptance in his voice broke Maya's heart. This little boy had been forced to grow up in a world where knowledge was armor and innocence was a luxury he couldn't afford. "What if we made it more fun?" Maya suggested, and spent the next hour turning advanced mathematics into games and stories that made Jean laugh with genuine delight. They were in the middle of converting fractions into pizza slices when Kwang appeared in the library doorway. Maya looked up to find him watching them with an expression she couldn't read, something between surprise and hunger that made her stomach flutter with dangerous awareness. "It is time for Jin's piano lesson," Kwang announced. "5 more minutes, father," Jean pleaded. "Maya is helping me understand the homework." "Now," Kwang said, but his voice held indulgence rather than command. After Jean left, reluctantly trailing his music teacher toward the piano room, Maya found herself alone with Kwang for the first time since her arrival. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken awareness. "You are good with him," Kwang observed, moving to the window that overlooked the gardens where several men in dark suits moved with casual alertness. "He's a wonderful boy," Maya replied. "You should be proud." "I am," Kwang said quietly. "He is the only good thing I have ever created." The raw honesty in his voice made Maya look at him more carefully. For just a moment, the mask of absolute control had slipped, revealing something vulnerable underneath. "His mother," Maya asked carefully, "died when he was 3, Kwang replied, his voice becoming neutral again. "Quel accident." "I'm sorry," Maya said, meaning it. Kwang turned from the window to study her face with that unnerving intensity. "You cook for him. You help with his homework. You make him laugh. Why?" Maya considered the question, recognizing that her answer mattered more than simple politeness. "Because he's a little boy who's been through something terrible," she said finally. "Because he needed someone to take care of him, and I was there." Kwang moved closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, sandalwood, and something darker that made her think of dangerous forests and hidden secrets. "And now," he said softly, "you are here, under my protection, in my home, taking care of my son." The way he said it made it sound like a claim, like a statement of possession that should have terrified her. Instead, Maya felt something warm unfurl in her chest, something that felt dangerously close to belonging. "Your rules," she said, meeting his gaze directly. "No leaving the compound. No phone calls without supervision. No contact with the outside world. How long do you expect me to live like a prisoner?" Kwang's expression hardened slightly. "Until you're safe. until they understand that you are protected by someone they cannot touch. And what if I don't want your protection? Maya challenged, stepping closer until she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. What if I'd rather take my chances? For a heartbeat, Kwong looked at her like she was something utterly foreign, a puzzle he couldn't solve. Then you would be dead within hours, he said finally. And Jean would blame himself for failing to keep you safe. Is your freedom worth his guilt? It was a low blow, expertly delivered, and Maya felt her anger rise to match his calculating calm. Don't use him against me, she said fiercely. Don't you dare use that child's feelings as leverage. Something shifted in Kwong's expression, a crack in the armor that revealed surprise and what might have been respect. You defend him, Kwong observed. Even against me. Always, Maya said without hesitation. He's just a little boy. He deserves to be protected, not used. The silence that followed felt charged with electricity, heavy with recognition, and something more dangerous. Kwong studied her face like he was seeing her for the first time, really seeing her. You're not what I expected, he said quietly. What did you expect? Maya asked. Kwong smiled then, a real expression that transformed his face from marble into something devastatingly human. Someone who would be grateful for the luxury. Someone who would accept protection without questioning its cost. Someone who would not challenge me in my own home. Disappointed? Maya asked, surprised by her own boldness. Kwong stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. Fascinated, he corrected, and the word hung between them like a promise and a threat. The scream came at 2 a.m, piercing through the silence of the compound like a blade through silk. Maya bolted upright in her bed, her heart hammering as she recognized Jin's voice raised in terror. She was moving before conscious thought caught up, bare feet silent on the marble floors as she ran toward the sound. Jin's bedroom door stood open, light spilling into the hallway like a beacon of distress. Maya found him sitting up in bed, his small body shaking with violent tremors, his face wet with tears he was trying desperately to control. The nightmare had left him lost somewhere between sleep and waking, his eyes wide and unfocused as he fought against invisible attackers. Hey, sweetheart, Maya whispered, approaching slowly so as not to startle him further. You're safe. You're home. Jin's gaze snapped to her face, recognition flooding back as the dream released its hold. Without hesitation, he launched himself into her arms, clinging to her with the desperate strength of a drowning child finding solid ground. They came back, he sobbed against her shoulder. In my dream. They came back and you weren't there to help me. Maya's heart shattered as she held him, one hand stroking his dark hair, while the other rubbed soothing circles on his back. I'm here now, she murmured. I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere. She began to hum softly, an old lullaby her grandmother had sung to her during her own childhood fears. Jin's trembling gradually subsided, his breathing evening out as the melody washed over him like a healing balm. Maya continued to hold him, rocking slightly as she had when he was smaller, when the world had been simpler and safety was something that could be guaranteed with a mother's touch. From a doorway came the softest sound of a footstep on marble. Maya looked up to find Kwong standing in the shadows, his dark eyes fixed on them with an expression so raw and vulnerable that it took her breath away. He was dressed in black silk pajama pants and nothing else, his usually perfect hair mussed from sleep. But it was the look on his face that made Maya's chest tighten with recognition. Longing, grief, and something deeper that looked like hunger for a peace he'd forgotten how to find. Their eyes met across the dimly lit room, and Maya saw him for what he truly was beneath all that controlled authority. A man who had lost his partner in raising this beautiful boy, who carried the weight of keeping Jean safe in a world that wanted to use him as leverage. A father who was strong enough to protect his son from any external threat, but helpless against the nightmares that invaded his sleep. Kwong stepped into the room, his movements quiet and careful as he approached the bed. Jean looked up at his father's approach, his face still streaked with tears but no longer lost in terror. Bad dream. Father, Jean explained unnecessarily, his voice small and ashamed. Kwang sat on the edge of the bed, his large hand gentle as he touched his son's face. They come sometimes, he said simply. It is not weakness to be afraid of things that have already hurt you. Maya is good at making them go away, Jean said, snuggling deeper into her embrace. She knows the right songs. Kwang's gaze returned to Maya's face, and she saw surprise there, as if he hadn't expected her to possess this particular skill. My grandmother used to sing to me, Maya explained quietly, when I was scared of the dark or the sounds in our old apartment building. Music has a way of pushing back the shadows. Jean yawned against her shoulder, the adrenaline of fear finally giving way to exhaustion. Maya continued to hum, watching as his eyelids grew heavy and his breathing deepened toward sleep. When she was certain he was resting peacefully, she carefully laid him back against his pillows, tucking the covers around him with maternal precision. Kwang rose as she did, following her from the room with silent steps. In the hallway, with Jin's door closed softly behind them, the weight of what had just passed between them seemed to expand in the darkness. "Thank you," Kwang said quietly, and his voice held a quality she hadn't heard before. Gratitude, yes, but also something that sounded like relief. "He has nightmares often?" Maya asked. Kwang's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Since the first attempt on his life when he was 6, they used to be worse, but time helped. Until this week, Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach. The first attempt, as if there had been others. "How do you bear it?" she asked softly, knowing that people want to hurt him just because he's your son. Kwang was quiet for so long that Maya thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice held the weight of years spent carrying impossible burdens. "The same way you bore watching your restaurant struggle while you worked 3 jobs to keep it running," he said. "The same way you smiled at customers who treated you poorly because you needed their money. The same way you chose to help a stranger's child even when it put you in danger. You do what you must to protect what matters." Maya stared at him, her mind reeling. How could he possibly know about her financial struggles, about the years she'd spent fighting to keep Golden Dragon afloat after her grandmother's death? "You investigated me," she said, and it wasn't a question. "Thoroughly," Kwang confirmed without apology. Maya Chun Johnson, 26 years old, born in San Francisco to David Johnson and Lee Chun. Raised primarily by your paternal grandmother, Evelyn Johnson, after your parents died in a car accident when you were 12. Graduated from NYU with a degree in business administration, but returned to Seattle when your grandmother's health failed. Inherited a struggling restaurant and a mountain of debt. No criminal record, no political affiliations, no romantic entanglements that lasted longer than 6 months. Each fact hit Maya like a small violation, a reminder that her privacy had been stripped away the moment she'd chosen to help Jean. "You know everything about me," she said, hating how exposed she felt. "I know the facts," Kwang corrected. "But facts do not tell me why you chose to save a stranger's child. Why you comfort him when he has nightmares. Why you challenge me even when you know I could make your life much more difficult." Maya met his gaze directly, refusing to be intimidated by his intensity. "Maybe because I understand what it's like to lose your parents young, to have to grow up faster than you should, to carry responsibilities that feel too big for your shoulders." Kwang stepped closer, close enough that she could see the exhaustion he hid so carefully behind his mask of authority. "And what do you understand about carrying responsibilities too big for your shoulders?" he asked quietly. Maya thought about the years spent working multiple jobs, about lying awake at night calculating bills and interest rates, about the customers who saw her skin color before they saw her competence. "I understand what it feels like to be responsible for something you love more than your own life," she said. "I understand what it's like to make choices that other people judge without knowing the full story. I understand what it's like to be strong because you don't have any other option." Something shifted in Kwang's expression, recognition passing between them like an electrical current. "The restaurant was more than a business to you," he observed. "It was all I had left of my family," Maya admitted. "My grandmother's recipes, her stories, the customers who became like relatives. When I was struggling to save it, I felt like I was fighting to save her memory. And you lost it anyway, Kwong said gently. Maya nodded, surprised to find that the old grief had softened around the edges. I held on as long as I could, but the neighborhood was changing, and I couldn't compete with the chains. I sold it 6 months ago to pay off the debt. What did you plan to do next? Kwong asked. Start over somewhere else, Maya said with a shrug that felt less casual than she intended. Find another restaurant job, save up, maybe try again someday. Kwong was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the dim hallway light. You could have walked away that night, he said finally, when you saw Jean being attacked. You could have called the police from a safe distance and avoided all of this. Maya considered the question seriously, thinking back to that moment when fear and compassion had warred in her chest. No, she said simply. I couldn't have. Not, and live with myself afterward. Even knowing what you know now, Kwong pressed. Even knowing the cost. Maya thought about her small apartment, her simple life, the freedom to walk down any street without armed guards shadowing her movements. Then she thought about Jin's smile when she made him pancakes, the way he lit up when she helped him with homework, the absolute trust in his dark eyes when nightmares made him reach for her. Especially knowing what I know now, she said firmly. Kwong moved closer still, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his bare chest, close enough to see the scar that cut through his left eyebrow and wonder what violence had put it there. You realize what you are saying, he said softly. You're choosing this life, this danger, this isolation. I'm choosing him, Maya corrected. I'm choosing to be here for a little boy who has nightmares about men who want to hurt him because of who his father is. And what about his father? Kwong asked, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. What do you choose about him? Maya's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the question beneath the question. The hallway suddenly felt charged with possibility, heavy with the weight of attraction they'd both been trying to ignore. That's more complicated, she admitted. Because you are afraid of me, Kwong said. Maya shook her head slowly. Because I'm not afraid enough of you. Because when I see you with Jean, I see the man you could be if you didn't have to be dangerous. Because when you look at me like you're looking at me right now, I forget that I'm supposed to be your prisoner. Kwong's hand rose slowly, giving her time to pull away before his fingers traced the line of her jaw with devastating gentleness. You're not my prisoner, he said quietly. You are something much more dangerous than that. What am I? Maya whispered. Kwong smiled, and in that expression Maya saw past all his careful controls to the man underneath, lonely and fierce and capable of tenderness that could destroy her completely. You are the woman who makes my son laugh, he said. The woman who challenges my authority and makes me want to deserve her respect. The woman who has no idea how beautiful she looks standing in my hallway at 2 in the morning, defending my child from nightmares. His thumb brushed across her lower lip, and Maya felt her world tilt on its axis. You're the most dangerous thing that has ever entered my carefully controlled life, Maya Chin Johnson. And I am beginning to think that I do not want to let you go. The request had seemed innocent enough. Jean wanted to visit the Seattle Art Museum to see the special exhibit on ancient Korean ceramics for his cultural studies project. 3 weeks of living in the compound had made Maya understand that even the smallest trip outside required military-level planning. But Kwong had agreed after she'd pointed out that Jean needed some normalcy in his carefully controlled life. Maya walked through the museum's soaring halls with Jin's small hand tucked securely in hers, marveling at how something as simple as looking at art could feel like the greatest luxury in the world. Behind them, she was aware of the discreet presence of 2 security guards who moved through the galleries with the practiced invisibility of men trained to blend into any environment. Jean paused before a display case containing delicate celadone pottery, his dark eyes bright with genuine interest as he read the placard describing the glazing techniques used centuries ago. My great-grandmother had bowls like these, he told Maya quietly. Father says they were lost when our family had to leave Korea quickly many years ago. There was something in his voice that made Maya look at him more carefully, recognizing the weight of history that this 80-year-old carried like an inheritance he hadn't asked for. Maybe we can find similar pieces somewhere, she suggested. Something to connect you to that part of your heritage. Jean smiled up at her with such pure happiness that Maya felt her chest tighten with protective affection. This beautiful, intelligent child deserved to grow up surrounded by art and culture and wonder, not bodyguards and bulletproof glass and nightmares about men who wanted to hurt him. Can we see the contemporary section too? Jean asked. Father says understanding both old and new helps you see where you fit in the story. Of course, Maya replied, struck by how Kwang's wisdom shaped even casual conversations with his son. They were moving toward the escalator when Maya noticed the man in the gray jacket. Something about the way he moved triggered her instincts. Too purposeful for a casual museum visitor, his attention focused on Jean rather than the exhibits. When she looked back over her shoulder, she spotted a second man near the information desk, also watching them with predatory interest. Maya's blood turned to ice water as understanding crashed over her. Somehow, despite all of Kwang's precautions, they had been found. She squeezed Jin's hand gently, forcing her voice to remain calm and cheerful even as her heart began hammering against her ribs. Jean, sweetheart, I want you to stay very close to me, okay? Don't let go of my hand, no matter what happens. Jean looked up at her, and she saw his own survival instincts activate as he recognized the change in her tone. Without question or argument, he moved closer to her side, his small body pressed against her leg as they continued toward the escalator. Maya caught the eye of one of their security guards, a silent man named Chun who had been nothing but professional courtesy for the past 3 weeks. She saw him register her concern and begin moving through the crowd with increased alertness, his hand shifting toward his jacket in a gesture that looked casual but wasn't. The attack came as they stepped onto the escalator. The man in the gray jacket moved first, pushing past a group of tourists with violent efficiency as he lunged toward Jean. Maya reacted on pure instinct, sweeping Jean behind her body while screaming a warning that echoed through the museum's marble halls. "Get away from him," she shouted, her voice carrying all the maternal fury of a lioness protecting her cub. The man's hand closed around her wrist instead of Jin's arm, his grip like steel as he tried to drag her toward his companion. Maya drove her elbow into his solar plexus with enough force to make him grunt and loosen his hold, adrenaline lending strength to muscles that had learned self-defense in the dangerous neighborhoods of her youth. "Jean, run to Chun," she commanded, pushing the boy toward their security guard who was fighting his way through the panicking crowd. But Jean, brave and foolish and impossibly loyal, refused to leave her. Instead, he grabbed onto Maya's leg with desperate strength, his small voice raised in Korean as he called for help from anyone who would listen. The second attacker reached them as Maya was still fighting off the first, his hand reaching for Jean with casual confidence. Maya saw the needle in his other hand, something that looked medical and terrifying, and pure rage flooded her system like molten metal. She grabbed a heavy museum catalog from the information stand and swung it with every ounce of strength she possessed, catching the second man across the temple hard enough to stagger him backward into a display case that shattered with a sound like breaking thunder. Security alarms began wailing throughout the building as museum guards converged on the scene, but Maya barely registered the chaos around her. All her attention was focused on keeping Jean safe, on being the shield between him and the men who wanted to tear him away from everything he loved. Chun reached them finally, his weapon drawn and his face transformed into something cold and lethal. The attackers, faced with armed resistance and a crowd of witnesses, began to retreat toward the museum's side exits with military precision. But Maya knew with terrible certainty that this was only the beginning. They had been found once, which meant they could be found again. And next time, Kwang might not be able to protect them. Her hands shook as she pulled Jean against her chest, feeling his small body trembling with the aftershocks of terror and adrenaline. Over his head, she met Chin's grim expression and saw her own fears reflected there. "We need to get him home," she said quietly. Chin nodded, speaking rapidly into a concealed microphone as he guided them toward the museum security office where they could wait for extraction. Maya could hear sirens approaching outside, but she knew that by the time the authorities sorted through witness statements and security footage, their attackers would be long gone. The ride back to the compound passed in tense silence, broken only by Jin's quiet sniffles against Maya's shoulder and the constant chatter of radio communications from the front seat. Chun was coordinating with what sounded like half of Seattle's Korean community, calling in favors and activating networks that Maya was only beginning to understand. When they pulled through the compound's gates, Maya saw armed men positioned at intervals that hadn't been there when they'd left. The escalation was immediate and visible, Kwang's organization shifting into a defensive posture that looked like preparation for war. Kwang met them at the front entrance, and the sight of him made Maya's breath catch in her throat. Gone was any pretense of civilized businessman. This was the predator unleashed, dressed in black tactical clothing that emphasized the lethal power of his frame. His face was a mask of controlled fury that made the air around him feel charged with deadly electricity. His dark eyes swept over Jean first, cataloging every detail to ensure his son was unharmed, then moved to Maya with an intensity that made her feel like he was looking into her soul. "Tell me," he commanded quietly, and Maya found herself recounting the attack with clinical precision while Jean remained pressed against her side. When she finished, Kwang was silent for a long moment, his jaw working as he processed the information with the calculating efficiency of someone planning systematic destruction. "You protected him," Kwang said finally, and there was something in his voice that made Maya's pulse accelerate. "Of course I did," Maya replied simply. "He's just a child." "They had a sedative," Kwang continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "They came prepared to take you both alive." The implications of that statement hit Maya like cold water, and she tightened her hold on Jean unconsciously. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Kwang said, his smile sharp enough to cut glass, "I remind certain people why it is unwise to threaten what belongs to me." He moved closer, close enough that Jean could reach out and grab his father's hand, anchoring himself to both adults who had become his entire world. "You were hurt?" Kwang asked Maya, his voice gentling as he noticed the bruises already forming on her wrist where the attacker had grabbed her. "Nothing serious," Maya assured him, though she could feel the soreness beginning to set in as adrenaline faded. Kwang's hand rose to trace the bruises with devastating gentleness, his touch feather-light against her damaged skin. "They marked you," he said quietly, and there was something in his tone that made Maya shiver with recognition of the violence he was capable of unleashing. Jean looked up at both of them, his young face serious as he processed the weight of what had happened. "Are the bad men coming back?" he asked quietly. Kwang knelt down to his son's eye level, his large hands framing Jin's face with infinite tenderness. "No," Kwang said with absolute certainty. "They will never threaten you again. I promise." "How can you be sure?" Jean whispered. "Because," Kwang replied, his voice carrying the weight of empires and the promise of destruction, "I'm going to make sure they understand that touching my family is the last mistake they will ever make." The way he said family made Maya's heart skip beats, because somehow, without her noticing, that's what they had become. Not a powerful man and his protected asset, but something deeper and more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Later that evening, after Jean had been tucked in a bed with extra security posted outside his room, Maya found Kwang standing in his study, staring out at the compound's grounds where armed figures moved through the darkness like deadly shadows. "It's starting, isn't it?" Maya said quietly. "The war you've been trying to avoid." Kwang turned to face her, and in the lamplight, she could see the exhaustion he'd been hiding behind his mask of authority. "It started the moment they decided my son was an acceptable target," he replied. "Everything since then has been me showing restraint." Maya moved closer, drawn by something she couldn't name, something that felt like gravity pulling her into his orbit. "And now," she asked. "Now the restraint ends," Kwang said simply. "Now they learn what it costs to threaten the only two people in this world that I cannot lose." The admission hung between them like a confession, raw and vulnerable in a way that made Maya's breath catch in her throat. "Kwang," she whispered, but he silenced her with a touch, his fingers tracing her face with the same devastating gentleness he'd shown her bruises. "You could have run today," he said quietly. "When the attack started, you could have left Jean and saved yourself. But you didn't. You stood between him and danger like you were his mother, like he was worth dying for." "He is," Maya said without hesitation. "He's worth everything." Kwang's smile was soft and fierce and absolutely beautiful. "And you, Maya Chen-Johnson, are worth going to war for." Then he kissed her, soft and claiming and full of promises that would reshape both their worlds. While outside the compound walls, the machinery of retribution began its deadly work. The war lasted exactly 72 hours. Maya watched from the safety of the compound as Kwang orchestrated the systematic dismantling of the rival syndicate with surgical precision. Phone calls were made in languages she didn't understand to people whose names would never appear in any official records. Assets were frozen, supply lines were severed, and key personnel simply vanished into the kind of legal complications that would take years to resolve. By the third morning, the threat that had upended Maya's life was nothing more than a cautionary tale whispered in the shadows of Seattle's underworld. Maya found Kwang in his study just after dawn, still dressed in the black tactical clothing he'd worn for 3 days straight, his usually perfect appearance finally showing the strain of conducting a war from behind a desk. The dangerous elegance was still there, but underneath it she could see the exhaustion that came from carrying absolute responsibility for other people's safety. "It's done," he said without looking up from the reports scattered across his desk. "The men who attacked you at the museum have been permanently relocated to jurisdictions where they will face appropriate consequences. Their organization has been dissolved, and their leadership has accepted new career opportunities that will keep them occupied for the foreseeable future." Maya moved closer, noting the careful euphemisms that painted pictures she probably didn't want to see too clearly. "No one was killed," Kwang continued, perhaps sensing her concern. "But they understand now that some boundaries should not be crossed." She believed him, recognizing the difference between justice and vengeance in the controlled satisfaction in his voice. "What does that mean for us?" Maya asked quietly. Kwang finally looked up from his papers, and Maya saw something in his dark eyes that made her breath catch. Relief, yes, but also something that looked like vulnerability. "It means," he said slowly, "that the contract that brought you here is complete. The threat is neutralized. You're free to leave whenever you choose." The words should have filled Maya with relief. 3 weeks ago, freedom was all she had wanted. Now, standing in Kwang's study with early morning light streaming through bulletproof windows, the thought of walking away felt like tearing out her own heart. "And if I choose to stay?" she asked. Kwang rose from his chair with fluid grace, moving around the desk until he was close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his tired eyes. "If you choose to stay," he said quietly, "it will not be as my protected asset or my grateful refugee. It will be as my partner, my equal, the woman I love more than my own life." The confession hit Maya like a physical force, stealing her breath and making her pulse race with possibility and terror in equal measure. "Kwang," she whispered, but he continued as if he'd been rehearsing these words for days. "I'm offering you marriage, Maya Chen-Johnson. Not a contract or an arrangement or a convenient solution to a complicated problem. I am offering you my name, my protection, my devotion, and my son's future. I am asking you to be Jin's mother and my wife and the center of a life that I never imagined I could have." Maya stared at him, her mind reeling with the magnitude of what he was offering. Marriage to one of the most powerful and dangerous men in the Pacific Northwest. Partnership in a world where violence was a business tool and safety was measured in armed guards and bulletproof glass. But also love that could move mountains and protection that would follow her to the ends of the earth, and a little boy who already looked at her like she hung the moon. "I need to think," she managed to say. Kwang nodded, as if he'd expected no other answer. "Take all the time you need. But know this, Maya. Whatever you choose, I will respect completely. If you want to leave, I will ensure you have a new life anywhere you wish to go, with enough resources to start over safely. If you choose to stay, I will spend every day earning the trust you place in me. Maya left the study with her heart in turmoil, but she didn't have to think for long. The answer came when she found Gene in the kitchen, sitting at the counter with his homework spread before him, humming the lullaby she'd sung to chase away his nightmares. Maya, Gene said brightly when he saw her, will you help me with my math? Father is busy with business, and the problems are difficult. Maya settled beside him, noting how natural it felt to slip into the role of the woman who helped with homework and made breakfast and provided the kind of steady presence that turned a house into a home. Of course, sweetheart, she said, and as she helped him work through fractions and word problems, Maya realized that her choice had already been made. That evening, she found Kwong in the garden, where he stood looking out over the compound's walls toward the lights of Seattle spread below them like scattered diamonds. The sight of him in profile, strong and solitary and beautiful, made her chest tighten with emotion that felt too big for her body to contain. I have an answer for you, she said quietly. Kwong turned toward her, his expression carefully neutral despite the tension she could see in the line of his shoulders. I don't want to leave, Maya continued. I don't want to go back to my small apartment and my ordinary life and pretending that the last 3 weeks never happened. I don't want to wake up in a world where Gene isn't calling for help with his homework and you aren't standing in doorways looking at me like I'm something precious. Kwong stepped closer, hope and something deeper beginning to show in his dark eyes. But Maya continued, raising a hand to stop his approach. If I stay, I need something from you. Anything, Kwong said without hesitation. I need to matter, Maya said firmly. I need to be more than just Jin's mother and your wife. I need to contribute something meaningful to this life we're building. What do you want? Kwong asked, and Maya could see him already calculating how to give her whatever she might request. I want to open a restaurant, Maya said. A real one this time, with the resources to succeed and the freedom to create something beautiful. I want to feed people and employ people and build something that adds value to this community you protect. Kwong was quiet for a long moment, and Maya held her breath as she waited for his response. Golden Dragon was your grandmother's legacy, he said finally. What would you call this new place? Maya smiled, feeling pieces of her future clicking into place like a puzzle finally solved. Home, she said simply. I would call a home. Kwong moved closer then, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, close enough to see the love that transformed his dangerous features into something breathtakingly tender. Then home it shall be, he said softly. Your restaurant, your legacy, your contribution to our life together. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small velvet box that made Maya's heart skip several beats. Maya Chin Johnson, he said, dropping to one knee in the garden where armed guards watched the perimeter and spotlights painted the walls with security. Will you marry me? Will you be my partner and Jin's mother and the woman who makes our house into a home? Maya looked down at this powerful, dangerous man kneeling before her in the place where she'd been brought as a prisoner and had somehow found everything she'd never known she wanted. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, I will marry you, Kwong Min-jun. I will be your wife and Jin's mother and the woman who loves you both more than safety or comfort or the simple life I used to think I wanted. Kwong rose and kissed her with all the passion and tenderness and promise of forever, while somewhere in the house behind them, Gene pressed his face to his bedroom window and smiled with the pure joy of a child who had finally gotten the mother he'd been dreaming of. 6 months later, Maya stood in the kitchen of home, watching through the window as Kwong taught Gene how to properly handle the responsibility that came with power, their heads bent together over some lesson that would prepare the boy for the legacy he would one day inherit. Her wedding ring caught the afternoon light, a circle of platinum that had transformed from symbol of captivity to promise of partnership. The restaurant was everything she dreamed and more, filled with the laughter of families and the satisfaction of feeding people who had become part of her extended community. The customers included businessmen and artists, families and couples, all drawn together by food that spoke of home and belonging and the particular magic that happened when love was the secret ingredient. As she watched her husband and son in the garden beyond the bulletproof glass, Maya reflected on the choice she'd made and the life it had given her. It wasn't the safe, ordinary existence she'd once imagined for herself, but it was infinitely more beautiful than anything her limited dreams had ever dared to envision. Think about the choices that changed everything in your own life, the moments when kindness led you somewhere unexpected. Share in the comments what moment of compassion or courage opened a door you never saw coming. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing we can do is exactly what our hearts tell us is right. Maya smiled as Jean ran toward the kitchen, his face bright with excitement about some new discovery, while Kwong followed at a more measured pace, his dark eyes finding hers through the window with an expression that still made her pulse race with recognition of how completely they belonged to each other. She had saved a boy from an alley, not knowing he was the Korean Mafia's son. But in saving him, she had found something she hadn't even realized she'd been looking for. She had found her family, her purpose, and a love worth any risk. She had found her way home.